Greetings, scholars, and welcome to this mini lecture on asking for help. This is about the professional aspect of peer review. It's going to help you with how to start formulating your own ideas on what you can use peer review for. We're getting out of that sort of student zone of you do peer review because you have to. Whether or not you even look at any of the feedback is often only if you have to. And that prioritization of teacher or lecturer feedback, and how I kind of want to change your attitude towards that. So we're going to be talking about edits, revisions, what's the difference, when to ask for help when you know you're ready to ask for help, what to do with help when you get it, and how to be as good of a reviewer or reader for your peers as you wish you had in your life. Because when you find those friends, colleagues that you can ask to read your papers, that you know that you get useful feedback from, they become valuable treasures in your career. And you never want to lose them. And a good way to not lose them is to be that value to them as well. You kind of share the burden of doing each other favors back and forth. So, let's see. Boop. When you're asking for help, you're asking to be vulnerable. Other people are reading your unpolished work. That's sometimes a little scary. So kind of remembering that you aren't your writing. That's why if you'll see in guidelines for peer review and things, I always have it that you don't use the second person in peer feedback. You don't say, you missed this, or you're really unclear here, or you've got a problem with punctuation. I am not my writing, or I'm certainly not my first drafts. So making sure that that language is separating the person from the paper is really important for keeping feedback professional, and kind of helping you swallow criticism, because that's what peer review is. Peer feedback is criticism of your work. So the best way we can do that is make sure that we're not accidentally making it feel like criticism of you. Your writing can change, your writing can improve. You can constantly learn and polish, do new genres, write in different ways. Your writing is only a snapshot of you today, whereas, you are you. So keeping that sort of clear separation between you and your work is a very important part of not only giving peer feedback, but accepting peer feedback. Even if they don't say you, they say this draft is all over the place, making 3 different points. You can have to take a deep breath and be like, you're right, this draft is kind of all over the place. I, however, am a relatively put together person. Those kind of abilities to separate yourself from the document is important. Doesn't mean that you're still not going to feel that vulnerability, but you need to be able to accept criticism, because it is equally hard for you to see flaws in your own writing. Even down to the sentence level, you'll have a different word where it's supposed to be, but you know what it's supposed to say. So as you're reading, your brain fills in that sentence the way that you intended, and it's very hard to see what's actually there because you know what you were trying to write. So you're reading what you think you wrote, maybe not what's exactly on that page. So someone else, a fresh set of eyes, can find those things because they didn't write it. They haven't been staring at it for days or weeks or sometimes years. So you get those fresh eyes to be able to spot things that you haven't been able to see. But by asking for a second set of eyes, by asking for feedback, you are inviting criticism. So I guess understanding that that's what peer review is incredibly important. We're going to talk about how to put our editing faces on today. We're going to talk about what to do with that information when we get it back after we've had a few deep breaths and been like, yeah, well, your mom, but also thank you very much for taking the time to help me. Um, hmm, it's a hard kind of tension struggle with you're asking someone to criticize your work and then get it back. You need to be thankful for whatever they sent you. Even if you have a bad peer reviewer, we'll talk about how to work with that. I will also point out that I have been subconsciously trying to develop this idea of professional writing and professional revision all semester. If I came out with this on day one, I think you'd have just either fundamentally decided to accept or reject agreeing with me, and made the process harder. So a lot of people have wondered, why don't I give feedback on every draft? Because you will soon be out of this situation where there's this authority dynamic of somebody's the teacher, somebody's the professor. If they tell you to change something or they suggest to change something, it's not a suggestion, it's a command, right? So you're making it, what do they want? How can I make the thing that they want? And that's not what this course is about at all. You're in charge of your writing. You have the rights and the authority to your writing. You need to write something that you're proud of. You need to write something that you are putting in this portfolio at the end of the semester that you may share as writing samples for graduate programs, for job interviews. It needs to be yours. You're the one who needs to be happy with it. I'm happy that you explored the genre and did the thing. So it is not guess what I'm thinking. And if I were to give suggestions, even if I'm like, just a suggestion, do what you want, just by the fact that I am the professor for this class, it becomes a command and you lose that authority over your writing. Have I given feedback to you guys? Yes. If you send a comment, just like these draft letters, where you are asking about a specific thing that you really are unclear on, or you're not sure if you accomplished, or if that is what you were supposed to be doing, I absolutely read it and answer that question, because I'm there to help you make it better, but at your own path. So we go through this drafting, peer review, read other people's. You kind of get to learn about your own paper through modeling by seeing other examples of the genre when you're doing peer review. So you're reading other people's papers. You're getting to see what moves they made. So you can model those. You can maybe see a flaw or a shortcoming in the structure and then go, ooh, I also did that. And then that helps you go back and sort of self-redraft. Then you're going to get your peer feedback, and it's going to be maybe all over the place, maybe some great suggestions, maybe some things that you're like, not in a million years. That is also still useful feedback. But the fact that it's coming from peers means that you are already kind of in this mindset that they are just my classmates. Some of them may be better writers than me. Some of them may not be, but they're still just my classmates. Like nobody's the boss of me, as it were. And that helps you keep that authority over your work. So if somebody gives a suggestion, you can be like, nah. So I know that you're already there for peer review, but I want you to also cultivate kind of an elevated respect for peer review. Your peers, when you're outside of class, when you're in a working environment or you're in graduate school and you've got other grad students that have become your sort of reading, drafting, support friends, you're asking for their valuable time. And you're also asking them to do something that is really quite like dicey, where you've got a friend who sends you something. If you go too ham on the like, what did you mean here? Is that crazy? Like your fear of offending somebody is real. So it's very much like a social tightrope of trying to help them. They are asking for your criticism. So sending it back and saying, yeah, it looks good. That's not helpful. So you've wasted both of our times. So finding somebody that you know that you're both on the same page about that and being able to give honest feedback is very valuable. But you have to cultivate that relationship by asking for criticism and being willing to take what they give you. And then they will start to realize that this really is a professional peer review relationship, and they might become a better reviewer for you. And they might see you reviewing for them and become a better reviewer by modeling your great practices. And you're going to have great practices by the end of the next, 20 minutes for this lecture. So, you're vulnerable because you're too close to your writing, and you also really can't see the forest for the trees anymore, as they say. So putting your editing face on and being able to look at this thing like it's new again after you've drafted it, that's also a great time to like stop working on that and go do something else. When you come back, you can see more. It's fresher. That's hard to do sometimes in a tight semester timeline. But even giving it a whole day or half a day of working on other activities, moving your brain around so that you come back to it fresh, very important. So when you're ready to invite criticism, you need to double check that you are ready. In this class, you sort of have no choice because you got to put your stuff up for review this week, and there's going to be a peer review next week. But after this class setting, in the professional setting, you've got to use your peer reviewer strategically. It is a huge commitment of like time and emotion to review someone's draft. So you are having a big ask. This is a big favor for your peers. You're taking time out for that, which is why it's great to have these relationships where they look at your papers sometimes. If they have something, you look at theirs. It becomes kind of this cooperative process, especially in graduate school, but hopefully in whatever sort of career field office that you end up in, you'll have these people that you sort of become a team to make the best products, which is your writing, your work at the end. So think about it. Do you think this thing is actually great, but you're lacking that confidence to just like hit the send button? That's when you need to be honest about that. Say that you're just looking for encouragement. Like, is this okay? I think it's ready to go. Can I have a pat on the back? Will you help me hit the send button? That is being honest, that you're actually not looking to rededicate time to redraft this thing. You're not really looking for criticism unless there's some glaring, heinous thing that you didn't notice that they need to save you from yourself. So being honest with whether or not you're looking for encouragement or you are actually looking for critical feedback. Is there anything that you know is wrong? Like, is there something that you're like, yeah, I haven't gotten to, section blah, blah, blah. So it's a hot mess. Don't worry about it. That is useful to lay out right away in your draft letter when you're asking for feedback. If you know something's wrong, please don't waste their time to be like, hey, did you know that you don't actually conclude anything in chapter 2? Oh, yeah, I haven't even written that. It's like, oh, well, that would have been useful to know before I started reading it. So if there's something that's incomplete or you know that there are problems in places that you haven't fixed yet, mention that. If you know there are problems, but you don't know how to fix them, and that's why they're kind of stuck there, let them know. Say, like, I really don't think I explain XYZ thing on page whatever. Be as specific in both detail of what is the issue, but also the location of where should they be looking to help you with that. That's why page numbers are super handy. So if you have a problem, there's a problem, but you don't know how to fix it, direct them to that so that they can give a stab at it. Maybe give you a couple different ideas on how to fix that. And then, are you willing to accept that there are problems that you don't see? Are you willing to accept if they come back and say, I don't understand your methodology. Like, you haven't explained your theory at all. I have no idea what critical materialism means. You're inviting more work, because in the end, when you invite criticism, you're inviting, like, please give me more work to do. because your feedback means that you need to start revising. So also take your own temperature before you send this out on how much more work you're willing to do. Do you just need that pat on the back encouragement? Do you just need this one problem that you don't know how to fix suggested for how to fix it? Second set of eyes on just this one specific issue, and then you're like, I'm good to go on everything else. Or do you genuinely need to know if everything is working the way you think it is? So, don't waste the opportunity for useful feedback. Don't waste the reader's time. It is a huge investment. You can edit their work, make that relationship, or, like bake them cookies. I don't take them out to dinner. I don't know. Show your gratitude in some way. And remember that if you are just looking for encouragement, how do you get that? Maybe don't even send the draft. Writers do like boast and toasts where everybody goes out for drinks. You don't bring any writing with you. And you're just like, I got this thing submitted for publication. Everybody's like, yay. You just sort of pat each other on the back, give some emotional support, say like, I'm still working on my dissertation, but I've gotten chapter 3 to 25 pages, and everybody's like, yeah, go you. They don't need to read it. That's not what they're here for. You need encouragement. You need encouragement about the pace. You need maybe some accountability that you've gotten X amount accomplished in this period of time. That doesn't require a read, right? That just requires oh, you did the thing. Hooray. And you can have friends for that. You can have friends for encouragement, but they don't need to read it to just tell you that you're doing a great job. So if you are looking for that focused feedback on, say, like a particular problem that you don't know how to solve, maybe you just send that section, or maybe you send everything up until that section for them to be able to kind of get some context, but you really just need them for that one thing. Then sort of make it very laser focused and targeted. Other times you will have it done, but you're just really not sure what the reader-writer relationship is. That is another great time to get peer feedback, second set of eyes. And I believe we've talked about this in class before, but that mirroring for feedback, where you just sort of sum up right back to the author what you're getting out of this as a reader. You can sum up what their main points were, and then they can just sort of check that they line up with what they intended for their main points to be. You can kind of do that stream of consciousness kind of margin comments, where as you're reading, what you're thinking about, what you're finding interesting, what you have questions about, you just write them in those comments along the margins so that they can see sort of how you were feeling, what you were thinking as you were going. And if you've got a question and then they answer it for you 2 pages later, you're like, the resolve. And then you as an author can kind of go back and say like, okay, they're asking the right question. Wait for it. Here it comes on page 9. Or you go like, oh, they're already asking about that. I should probably at least put a signpost in on page 7 that we're getting to that, right? So those kind of things help you just see how a reader reads your paper. That is a great peer feedback ask, because that can really just help you double check that things are where you think they are for the reader's journey. And if anything's different from what you intended, then you've got the opportunity to sort of go like, I don't know, maybe Jim just reads like that. Or you get 2 or 3 and you go like, maybe I could make this clearer or signpost this earlier. So you've got all of these opportunities for what to do with peer feedback. All right, so let's make sure we have dealt with all of this. All right. Also, deadlines. Real quick thing on deadlines. We have them set in class. When you're in real world time, you need to have enough time, if you ask for peer feedback, to ask for feedback. They have time to read your thing and give you feedback, and then you have time to do the more work that you're going to have as a result of that peer review before your deadline. So you can't be like, hey, this paper's due tomorrow. Can you, read through it, tell me what needs changing, but I'm going to bed at midnight? Okay, thanks. I mean, I did that to my mother all the time in college, but she's going to love me no matter what. Can't really do that to colleagues and peers. So recognizing that this process takes time. Also, in part of the ask, you can say, hey, can you read this and give me your feedback by Friday, by, April 30th. Make some timeline where you've sort of already asked them if they can do it within this window. And if they can't, because they're like, I'm sorry, I'm going to be, in a cave underground for the next 3 weeks, then they already know that they can't take this on, right? Or if they're like, yeah, no problem, then we're already on the same page on this timeline. So always make sure that there is some schedule that you're agreeing to when you ask for this feedback, because they might be able to give you great feedback, but if they can't give it to you in that window that you're asking for, they need to know and politely decline, so that they haven't then done all this work and sent you great feedback like 2 days after you turned it in and you're like, so it's the worst when you get like critical feedback for changes after you've already sent something to the publisher and you're like, I guess I'll live with that for the rest of my life. So that actual time element is important to discuss at the beginning. All right, how to be a good reader. Finding good readers in your life starts by being the reader you wish you had. So your colleagues need help editing too. Be as good of an editor as you hope that you have in your life. I know I keep saying that, but it is important. When I have those go-to people in my life, the kinds of questions they ask, or the sorts of mere responses they give that I'm like, thank you. I try to then look at what they did, how did that help me, and how can I then be like that when I'm reading their work or someone else's work. And the better you get at sort of peer feedback, the better you get at putting it away for a couple days and then busting it back out and looking at it like it's a stranger's, and applying some of those techniques that you've mastered. So, types of feedback. There's good and bad feedback. And just like, being overly aggressive with like, you're terrible, saying something like, it looks great, nothing's wrong, it's perfect. If they're genuinely asking for feedback and not just a pat on the back, which they've been clear about being like, I need help, you officially haven't helped them. So being like, I don't know, it looks great, you're so amazing. If it's one of those support congratulatory asks, then that's the perfect response. But if they sent you a draft and they're talking about problems that they're having, or they're not sure if the reader is going to be picking up what they're laying down, sending it back being like, looks great, is both not specific and not helpful. Even if you think it's the most amazing thing ever, if you then do this sort of margin comment reader mirroring, where you're just letting them know what you're thinking the whole time, you can be like, wow, that's such a great point. Wow, that was amazing. Wow, you answered my question. You can express to them that it looks perfect, but that you've actually looked at it in a detailed way, because they have locations that they can kind of put a pinpoint to say, awesome, that landed exactly how I aimed it. So other types of bad feedback are unconstructive criticism. We are looking for constructive criticism. We all want this paper to be better at the end. So perfect doesn't help the paper be better at the end. Unconstructive criticism also doesn't help the paper be better at the end, and it's just mean. So personal judgment of writer, again with that second person, like, you've got issues with blah, blah, or your problem here is, again, we are not our writing. We are not our drafts. So avoid at all costs the second person when referring to the document, okay? You lost me, is also not great. You can just say like, I got lost, and you point your little arrow right at that cursor exactly in this sentence or this paragraph and go like, I got lost here. Great. So, broad problem identification. So if you say something like, it's not working for me, not my cup of tea, this was a bit boring, this wasn't for me, or you lost me. When though, you can react to, in a negative way, a paper, but you need to signpost and be specific about actual locations where it got boring or you lost me. I got lost here, right? Because they didn't lose me, the paper did. So if something isn't working, you need to start pointing that out with specific locations in the text. Vague statements like it's not my cup of tea are absolutely useless. When major revisions needed, that's also like, okay, but where though? Blow it up and just write a new paper? What? So being specific is part of that major. If you lack that specific locations or specific references to exactly what the issues are or where, then it's not constructive. So again, vague in where you're getting lost or getting bored doesn't help. Pointing it out is helpful. Vague statements are also just not helpful. Boring, you lost me, not my thing. Thanks, but get out. You've got this specifics of geographic location in the paper, right? Section 3 at the opening, or page 7, or just literally point to the sentence and put a margin comment. Specific locations are very important for the person to actually be able to target where they're going to make those changes. So that is the worst thing you could do for bad feedback, is not be detailed or specific, not giving locations, not giving what the actual issue is, because not my cup of tea doesn't tell me anything. So those are, be specific. Like if it's boring, fine. Maybe you could use the word boring, but it got repetitive on page 7, where I feel like you told me the same thing 3 times over a page and a half. That is helpful. I mean, it's harsh. You're like, wow, boring. But repetitive is more specific on what kind of boring variety we have and where it got boring. Now that is helpful feedback. The last bad feedback thing is no attempt to find a solution. So if there's something wrong, I mean, it's easy to hate on things. It's really hard to fix them. Give a couple suggestions if you have any. Like, I would restate some of those main points in your conclusion so that I remember how important and cool they are. Oh, good. Thank you. Any kind of suggestion you have on like, these 3 paragraphs kind of do the same thing. It's a little bit boring. Maybe you could just kind of like synthesize them all into 1 paragraph and like cut a whole page out. Maybe if you're trying to make different points here, just be a lot more clear on how these lead into each other or what's different about them. Those are 2 suggestions on how to fix that page 7 was real boring. So offering some suggestions. The flip side of, if you do offer suggestions and then you become a good feedback person, don't go back into the bad feedback cycle by getting butthurt if they don't use your suggestion. That is another bad feedback move. It's their paper. You can offer a suggestion, and maybe your suggestion inspired them to think of the other thing that they did. Thank you. But it's their paper. So if you say that they should swap these 2 chapters around and move something else, and they don't, like, not your paper. Write your own paper. My ex-husband went through and made line item grammar corrections to make my American English British English, because he was English from Britain, and no X, across my entire master's thesis, like 144 pages of literally changing something in every single sentence. I went through, because he did track changes, and I just read them and did like reject, 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 accept, because he was just making the voice into his voice, not mine. So if it was samey, just British versus American preference, I kept the American preference, or I kept it how I write, how I speak, because it's my paper, so it's my voice. Sometimes he pointed out some stuff where I'm like, oh, that sentence more clear the way you did that. Accept. So I maybe accepted 5 to 10% of his itty bitty tiny nitpicky grammar corrections. And then a couple weeks later, when it's done, I have it sent to the printers in London. I did live in England at the time. And he's the one who went to pick it up for me. And the rage that he had wasted hours of his life correcting my poor writing skills, and I just threw it all in the garbage. It's not his master's thesis, it's mine. So it should probably sound like I wrote it. And that makes you a bad helper if you try to take ownership of their writing. You can't get mad if they don't use your suggestions. And remember, just like why I am so careful that I will answer your specific questions about help that you need on a draft, because I don't want to step on your toes, and I don't want to make a suggestion that then sounds like a commandment, because you will immediately feel like you've lost that power and authority over how this paper is going to look. If I make a suggestion, it doesn't feel like a suggestion, and I know that just because of who I am in this room. So none of your peers, especially after you graduate and you're in normal land, your professional field, none of your peers should attempt to take that power and authority away from you like they're your professor. I am your professor, and I'm giving you all of that power and authority back because this is your writing. And I'm very serious about you developing your writing voice, your academic style, and for you to be proud of the things that you accomplish as you're working in these genres. And that is why I am so careful not to step on your toes. If you ask me something, I'm always here to help, but I'm not going to wave my authority around in the redrafting process because this needs to be your journey. So don't let anybody else do that to you either. Right. Useful feedback. Again, separating the work from the writer. They can talk about this draft, and it feels like they are helping you by helping you make a good piece of writing. It feels very sort of collaborative that we're both working on this third thing as opposed to they are attacking me. Very useful feedback is making sure that you're careful to separate the writer from the work. Constructive criticism. Even if you don't have all the answers, even if you're like, I don't know, I'm also struggling with that, you can at least point out something that you think is a struggle. Be specific and precise, all right? So identify the actual problem that you think you're experiencing as a reader and identify where you're feeling that problem. So if you can be specific in both what it is you're having issues with and where, then you are being very useful in your feedback. Concrete ideas for solutions, rather than be like, rework this with more theoretical framework. Offer a specific solution. Be like, I don't know, I'm offering examples of things, but give one or two like sample rewrites for like this one sentence that really threw you off. Or, you're like the thesis statement for like what this paper was about, I was following it, but then in the conclusion here, we didn't really handle the part about museums. And you said that like we've been working on that stuff about museums throughout the paper, and then you kind of left that out in the conclusion. And I think that needs to get summed up. And you're like, oh, a specific thing? a concrete idea for just solving that. Um, and the third big key for useful feedback is finding strengths. Don't forget to applaud the things that you really like, that you're really enjoying, that you found interesting or particularly strong, because when an author is in redraft mode, there's danger of those things getting swept out with the rest of the dust. So as a professor, sort of one of my like most traumatic days 10 years ago as a early lecturer, teaching writing, I was giving feedback on a narrative that the opening was amazing. Like the opening hook to like put me into the time and place and situate me with the character was just incredible. It was vivid, it was well written, it was funny, but serious, and it did all the work of establishing that. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is such a fun paper for me to read. Woo! And then when I'm getting into page like 3, 4, 5, I'm in there scribbling around, moving stuff, talking about, like how to move this stuff around as strengths. And I was genuinely thinking that I was just helping this great paper become excellent. But again, my authority sort of like steamrolled that intent. The things that I had pointed out as important or should be moved up on pages like 3 through 6 suddenly became the main focus of the entire paper. And when I got that redraft back in the final portfolio at the end of the semester, that whole opening was gone. And it just kind of became like a dry anthology paper that lacked that sort of magical uniqueness that had made it so great to begin with. And I felt like a jerk. Because you know what I could have done is while I was sitting there going like, this is so engaging, this is so vivid, this is so well written, I could have just drawn a line on that paper, or if it was digital, because here we are 10 years later, clicked on page 1 anywhere and put a margin comment and said like, this was so fun to read, this is so vivid, like what a great opening. It would have taken me 30 seconds and I could have saved some of the best work that I had gotten from any student all semester, and it didn't even end up in the final portfolio because I forgot to point out how great it was. So finding those strengths, these things that you're like, yes, keep that. Make sure that you're putting pins in the stuff that needs to stay when we're doing these like total remodels. So make sure to find the strengths. I know that sometimes they say like, give criticism in like a compliment sandwich where you like, say something good, add in your feedback, say something good again. You don't have to go that far because we're not writing sort of like formal end comments this time. But keeping that in mind, that when you do find something that you're enjoying or you think is interesting or well said, or even if it's not well said, you really like the point that they're making, make sure that you're expressing that. Help keep the strengths in a draft, because during the redrafting process, you don't know what's going to happen. And sometimes when it's nothing but bad news, when you get drafts back, even though you're ready to do the work and change stuff, it can really be a kick in the gut. So getting something like, my doctoral advisor, we've been slogging through changes and redrafts and pain and suffering for a couple of months. And she read a chapter that I'd sent, and as she's giving me the like, cut this and why is this here and blah, 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 she took the moment to say, and I just want to remind you, because this draft, I haven't read anything in a couple months, reminded me like, you are a really strong writer. It is really enjoyable to read your research because you try to make it engaging. You explain things simply so that we are following your very nuanced logic, and it's fun to read. You're a strong writer. I really enjoy reading your work. And that meant so much to me. And then I was able to keep it in mind as I am continuing to write that piece of research, because one of the strengths in my writing is that sort of clear, simplistic, I explain stuff with metaphors. I mean, I've been teaching for how long? So I teach as I'm explaining stuff in my research, and that is a strength in my writing. And for her to sort of remind us both of that was really valuable to me, to be able to then get my elbows in and fix all of that. So make sure that you're maintaining that sort of recognition of the gems in their work, and it helps focus the work on like, here's some strong things, and don't lose them in the fray. All right, so I keep saying, like, when you write the note, when you ask for revisions requests, you're going to write a draft letter as an assignment. But this genre of writing, this request for feedback, is something that you'll be using for the rest of your life. So getting the main points down and getting some exercise in this formal, informal system is incredibly important. And if they're your friends in grad school, you're still going to write them a draft letter, because you're going to email them a copy of your paper, and you're going to cover all of these things that are being covered, but like the formality of the language will be different based on how well you know your peer reviewer. So we're not really talking about like formality or voice or tone for this, but rather the components that you need to cover. Okay? So, write a note to your reader. This is how you kind of express what's going on with this paper, so that they get an idea of like why they're being asked. Maybe they're an expert in that field. Maybe they're not. Maybe you're like, yeah, but you're every kind of reader that I want. So kind of summarizing what the thing's about. If kind of the intended audience is important, like I'm sending this to scholarly journal, blah, 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 or this is a chapter in a book that will be more of a popular publication. So, more of a general audience, or, this is a paper for my advisor in a graduate program or whatever. Or this is a memo to the boss. Does it sound okay? Whatever it is, kind of give them an idea of what they're getting into. And ask for what you are asking for. If you are looking for helpful, constructive feedback, whether or not it is incredibly narrow, like in that, I know I have a problem, I don't know how to fix it, please help me. You could do that sort of laser focused approach, or that general, is anything broken, and how is this journey as a reader? So identify any problems that you know are there, that you've got an agenda to fix. Identify any problems that you know are there, but you don't know how to fix. This will help kind of focus their attention on helping you through those struggles. Communicate your hopes. Communicate what you hope to get out of this peer review. If it's majorly structural issues, okay, we need to talk about that. If it's really specific things, or if it's really kind of testing how it reads for your intended audience, these are all the kinds of details of what you're actually looking for that you need to communicate. Also remember that you need to have that timeline in there. Can they look at it for you by Friday? If they don't have time to write formal comments on it, can I buy you coffee on Friday and we can talk about what you saw? Or like, do you want to just give me a call sometime this weekend and just like riff on what you found? However you want that feedback and when you need it by. So those are kind of options. I've got friends that I send drafts of stuff to, that I'll send an email, and they'll call me a couple days later and say like, yeah, okay. And we talk through it. And then I can kind of point out like, so how did you feel about blah in chapter blah? And talk through it. Other times you're going to want that formal written feedback. So ask for what you want. Ask for what you need, so that they can be using their time and skills to the best of your needs, I guess. Also an honest account of the strengths and weaknesses can put everyone on the same page before starting out. So if you think you've done something really well, or you've asked like an excellent research question, and you know that you've made some really awesome conclusions about it, but you're not sure if you've expressed all of those components. Like, have I answered my research question clearly enough? Like, you know, in your head, like, nailed it. So you're asking for sort of that, like, where am I maybe not communicating this as effectively to show that I've answered that question? Because it can't just like catch us on the side of the head in the conclusion. We've got to be able to follow your logic as you go. So, we're going to talk about the different kinds of editing and when they might be useful for you in a minute, but just getting in that mindset of you're writing this draft letter, you're requesting feedback. We know that you're inviting criticism and you're also asking for more work to do when you get their feedback back. So those are two things that you already know while you're writing this. And then while you wait and or once it comes back, you need to be sure that you are willing to change everything. But please, for the love of all things good and green, save the original. When I am drafting a larger item, I will just put like a date string of numbers that are just like month and year, or, you know, the day that I'm working on it and month and year. So, you know, 12/4/21 would have been the thing I was working on April 12th of this month. So when I go back and I cut out a bunch of stuff, I will save as same title of everything, and it'll be 22/4/21. These are the changes I made on the 22nd. So then if something happens like I completely delete that beautiful intro to this story, I go to turn it in for peer review again with a friend, and they go like, what happened to that amazing intro? Which I did ask that student, and she was just like, well, in my revisions, I revised it. And I'm like, but where's your original draft that you turned in? Because this was back when we just did paper printed copies to the professor and not uploaded into Blackboard so that you had like the versions that you sent at different times. There was no way we could retrieve that because I had handed her back the physical paper. And if she like threw it out and then revised the paper and just kept hitting save instead of save as a different version, it was gone. It was gone, like forever. Like I ruined one bright, shiny gem in literature by forgetting to say how awesome something was when I was a reviewer. But that wouldn't have happened if everybody was playing smart with be willing to change everything, but oh my gosh, keep an original copy. Because taking something out and then having it read again and go like, actually, you know what? That whole section, that 10-page section on like, what's an object? I think that really does belong in here. And they're like, oh, no, you just go back to your old version and glue it into the newer one so that you've made all the other changes, and then you glue that old thing back into the new one. Keep multiple versions. When you're drafting and redrafting, always keep separate files for each of the versions. And back up everything often, okay? The my dog ate my homework thing is not cool in the digital age, but like my computer crashed still can't be an excuse anymore. In college, you know, like you can ask for an extension, you can blah, blah, blah. But in real work, you need to have produced X document by X day. That needs to happen. So be smart. There's cloud uploads now. I run around with like a bag of thumb drives. I've got this external hard drive right here that I back stuff up on very regularly, at least once a week. I think I would like cry for hours if I had to redo a whole week's worth of work, but it's better than a year's worth or more. So back up everything often in safe places so that like my kid threw my computer down the steps is a tragedy, but it's not also going to put you back to the Stone Age in your work. All right, so finally, how to edit, the holistic approach, looking at the document as a whole. That is your stepping back to look at it as a whole. what does it do overall? Does it answer from like page 1, you asked a question, page end, did we answer it? These are kind of holistic content and flow questions. What does the thing say? How does it say it? Whole sections, or, look at sections as like a unit, or even like sets of paragraphs as units. Do you need to move whole things around? If you made this point over a couple of pages and then you made this second point, and then a third one, do you think that the third one really should have come after the first one? So like, let's do point 132 instead of 123. These are the kinds of holistic revision things that you can be helpfully pointing out, or suggestion. Looking at content, mirroring back. I think end comments is one of the peer review methods that we looked at. You just read the whole thing, and then you kind of mirror back or sum up what the thing was about, and then put your sort of critical hat on and say, like, here's some of the things that I think were really interesting or really well done in the paper. I don't know if we've spent enough time addressing X for me to have really like been along on that journey. By the time you get to the conclusion, it kind of felt like a jump for understanding where you got to, a human cadaver being an object. Welcome to my research, by the way. So giving that sort of end overall comment feedback on like, here's what I learned from it. Here's what was interesting. I have a suggestion about blah and blah. Moving whole chunks or sections around. These are all holistic approaches, and that end commenting is kind of a holistic approach for overall, I'm feeling this about this work. You can still point to specific things, specific sections, specific points that are being made, but you're doing it as sort of like big chunks. After all that is done, because again, work smart, not hard. You don't want to like be putting wallpaper on 2x4s before we've got the sheetrock of the house up, right? You build the house before you put up the walls, before you decorate them. So you don't worry about like grammar, punctuation, if you might be deleting like that whole section. Why would you have wasted 3 hours crafting beautiful sentences that then get deleted? The answer is you won't delete them if you spent that time crafting those beautiful sentences. I was doing an article on Cockney rhyming slang as a cryptolect to exclude outsiders in downtown central London. And I had this very cool section where it was like the first time that Cockney had ever been on BBC radio, because, BBC proper English, received pronunciation was all that there was. And then during World War II, the Nazis could also learn received pronunciation because it was nobody's native dialect. It was a taught BBC, this is how you pronounce things, like school. So the Nazis learned how to speak received pronunciation, and everybody was afraid that they were going to send bad intel, like announce over the radio, like, everybody go outside now. And then, like dump toxic gas on London. So that concern, how do we fix this? We can't just like change received pronunciation fast enough for anybody to have gotten that memo. They just put people from Britain in their native dialects giving the news. So now all of a sudden received pronunciation was out during the war, and you got like the accent of a northerner, the accent of Cockney, downtown inner city London. And it is almost impossible to fake an accent that isn't your native accent to a native person who also speaks that accent. They will pick out any slight variation and they will call you on it. So it would have been impossible for the Nazis to pretend like they were Cockney Englishmen, unlike received pronunciation, which was, like book learned. And that's kind of how they saved Britain during World War II. And that is so cool and like so interesting, but really kind of was a tangent that didn't belong in my paper, and cutting out that 3-page Diddy. Tightened up the paper because it had nothing to do with my thesis statement. I wasn't doing like the history of popular Cockney in radio and television and film. That was not my thesis, right? I was looking at it as this secret outsider dialect. It hurt to cut those 3 pages out. Frankly, it's just a story that I can now tell you guys on a tangent because it's not published whenever, and that's kind of how I make that work worthwhile. But can you imagine if I had spent like another week really developing that section and like perfect word choice and beautiful sentences? It'd hurt worse to cut it, and my paper overall would have been worse because I left it in. So when you're in holistic stage approach, you don't worry about the small stuff. So as a reader, don't worry about the small stuff. We talk a little bit about never, ever, ever do grammar and punctuation corrections as a peer reviewer, certainly in my class, but don't waste your time on it otherwise. Because oftentimes we are not at that stage. We need to be comfortable with just like cutting out big chunks, big units, that 10-page section on the definition of an object. It went, and then it came back. And now I'm going to spend more time on it, making it nicer. But it didn't hurt so bad when it went because I hadn't spent that extra time wallpapering before the roof was on. I know I keep using that build a house metaphor, but like it's pretty obvious you don't like set the furniture and the tea set and like put the wallpaper on the walls when there's no roof on the house. So why would you do that in your writing? Make sure that you've got structurally everything where it's supposed to be, cut out stuff that shouldn't be there. Developed the things in the right pace that should be, move stuff around, and then you can start signposting to stuff that you're talking about next or previously and things like that in your writing. Don't even bother to do those next and previouslys until you're sure that they're all in that order. So you're not there yet. If you're getting a peer feedback, you're still looking at holistic things or reader response, like what your journey is as a reader. So beautiful sentences, perfect grammar, perfect punctuation. Like we don't worry about that till like step 7. So once you've gotten everything in the order you want, it's paced properly, the reader is mirroring back what you wanted to accomplish, then we move on to sentence level, line by line approach to good words in your overall structure of good writing. The second reason, other than we're not there yet when you're asking for peer review, is the very important, there's robots for that. Microsoft Word does that. They have spell check. They don't do a very good job, but Grammarly offers free software that helps with word choice, punctuation, grammar, will offer synonyms, will kind of squiggly line out if a sentence is too long or unclear. So if robots can do that, please don't waste a human's time, is another big, don't overburden your resources of peer reviews. Because if then somebody had to go through and copy edit your thing, then you've got another paper and they're like, dude, I already looked at the last one 3 times. I got my own work. Don't be there. So yeah, the line by line stuff is for the very end, and it's between you and the robots that will help you with that. So your voice and style will develop as you're arguing with the robot on what word is appropriate for that. And that is really your personal choice and your personal development. So I hope that this has helped for you to understand the place for peer review in your professional life. The other thing of getting bad feedback or feedback that you're like, I don't like those suggestions. That's not helpful. It is helpful though. Someone can give you terrible ideas on how to fix something or suggest that you cut something out that you're like, no. Sorry. No Zoom. Bye Zoom. They've still pointed out somewhere that looked like it needed work. So even if you don't like their suggestions, they've still targeted a zone that maybe could use some attention. So that kind of bad feedback, or like it got boring, and that's somewhat specific to that. Sometimes you need to translate that to it was unclear why we're doing this in this space. So then adding some clarity or redirecting for what we're doing in this step of the research, or what this point means to the bigger question, those kinds of things can then resolve the boring feedback that you get. So even bad feedback, especially if it's like specific bad feedback, you don't like what they said, but they've still pointed to where you could use some more work. So even bad feedback is good because you've got an idea of what's happening. Like I got really scathingly negative feedback on something I just did a couple months ago from somebody. I got like 2 good, useful ones, and then the third one was just like, this is what's wrong with humanities as scholarship today. Didn't like that I write with like a lot of, I guess, jargon, that it was really technical writing. And I think he misunderstood who the intended audience was. I'm talking a lot about publics in museums, and he's like, how are publics supposed to understand this? They're not. This is sort of that like insular, this is a museum professional writing for other museum professionals about the public. And not even like how to talk to the public, because then maybe it would make sense to demonstrate the kind of language and approach and structure, but that's not what it was about. So he misjudged who the intended audience was, and so his feedback reflected that this is not for that audience. And I agree with him. It is not for that audience. So it was still useful because it supported my idea of who I was writing for and who I was not writing for. And he was like, you are not writing for the public. And I'm like, nailed it. So that is my sum up that has run a bit long. But I just wanted you to have this information before you write those draft letters, and then before you finish this course and go out into your greater writing career, whether finishing school or right on into your field, for what to do when you need a second set of eyes. See you guys next week.